Good evening. Did that sound like a vampire?
Yeah.
Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith and Candelaria Thompson and, of course, Ken. How y'all doing?
Feel good. You enjoying this weather?
Y'all spent a good half hour
good
trying to
better?
waste time. You got, huh?
That's not no.
Oh,
You better
we
stop
were
lying
pressing
now.
nobody down.
Oh, no, you didn't base it out?
No.
Oh, you were uplifting?
No, we were realistic.
Let's see. She ain't no actress. She ain't this. I think it's a base down.
Oh,
We'll
I
leave it there.
love
But
That's not a down.
listen,
Did you not hear her say she's a great singer?
I saw the movie, right? And I really don't think
Our audience were referring to
The Lion King, and they're talking about
you don't just go
Beyonce.
right into
I
it.
didn't see I didn't, you're watching animals talk. I'm not trying to judge, it's an animal. So the fact that they're talking,
No, it's the voice, though.
Yeah.
The voices.
like your boy with the guy, Seth Rogen,
I heard
he
he's
was funny, yeah.
Yeah, Seth
Tumba.
is funny. He's
I
a
heard he
funny
was really
guy.
good.
Well, I went to the movie, and I went to the the lounge area, the VIP lounge one, and so they booked 3 tickets.
Do they have a seat with your name on it? I'm sure they do by now. Hey.
For a second, I was like, "What are you talking about?" And then I realized you're being facetious. You're being facetious.
We should arrange
I was
that.
thinking, do they put names on seats? That's what I was
that
thinking.
would be great.
No, but let me tell you the opposite of that. So my daughter booked 3 tickets.
Right.
So we get there, and she had a friend. So I figured she wasn't going to be sitting with me, so I could be sitting by myself. When I get there, someone else is sitting in the love seat of the half.
Oh.
Like, oh no. Because it's, those,
Was
the
it
dual
like,
seats.
was it full? Was the...
I don't know. All I know is someone else was sitting in A, and I was in B. Okay? And I
So
was
you had to
taken aback.
share?
I was like,
What do we do here?
and then they started, chatting with me. Like, so,
That's happened to me before.
whatever. It wasn't just, because, in a normal movie, if it's full, then someone's going to be next to you, but these are like love seats.
Right.
You
There's
know?
no, handle in between.
No.
But it's what you choose,
There's
though.
a handle on your side. Yeah, but that was empty when I chose it.
Oh.
You see? It was like they show you like one and it's never happened before.
Well, next time you should buy both.
I'm buying all 4. But
Right.
listen to what happened now. So I'm thinking, because she's talking to me, she's telling me about other things, and she has, which I've never seen this combo before, a hot dog, a popcorn, and a nachos. Never seen the popcorn and nachos.
I would
It's either
totally get
nachos
that.
or
Or
popcorn,
and a
or
hot dog.
nachos or popcorn. But it's not
The
hot
three?
dog, the nachos, and the popcorn.
Suppose
Okay?
you just want a little
lot of
taste
carbs.
of each.
So anyway, I'm thinking, and because she's conversing, and it's like a bad plane trip, and
good, Kendra. Thank you.
then
I get
all of a
that.
sudden, the Disney, what do you call it?
Preview?
The production. This is a Disney production comes on, and she go, "This Disney?" So I was very calm. I said, "Yes, Disney makes a range of movies, because now we're in a full." So she said, so she didn't say nothing. Then, or whatever, come on. This is Lion King?
She's in the wrong
I
theater.
said, yes, it's the Lion King. Is that not what you came to see? This is where they put me. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean this is where they put you? I come to see The Crawl.
Oh, that's
Crawl.
why she was in the wrong theater.
Yeah, she was.
That's why the seat was unoccupied by her.
She come to see The Crawl.
So what she ended up doing?
And I know
Sand?
The Crawl sound horror.
Yeah,
Any
I
idea
actually want to
of
see that.
The Crawl.
I don't like
Okay, not crawls or crawling.
the
Crawl.
crawl.
Yeah,
So she left.
she left. She had to pick up her nachos, popcorn, a hot dog, and go. So, she was nice enough.
Disney. No wonder
She
she was
said-
confused. That would make sense. Yeah.
This Disney?
Like Disney
Like
don't
that Disney don't make no crawl.
crawl.
So that was a little. So
that was
my,
funny.
my daughter said, she says, "I'm dead," because she could hear it. That's what you're saying now. I guess I'm dead.
That was funny.
Do you
The
like do you like horror films?
No, I don't. I used to like them, but I'm
Scary.
not for that anymore. I don't need the pressure.
Yeah, I've never. been
I don't need like that, the kind of stuff. Why?
I don't know why people enjoy being scared. Like it's
So good.
I
Except
I
when
don't need it.
you got to
Never
go
got
home
it.
by yourself, and then
No, but that isn't the part I'm not afraid of the movie. I don't like things jumping out at me.
You watch action films all the time. That's people jumping out.
No, not like that. You know it coming.
Well, then you
Okay.
know it coming because the music warns you too.
No, not when you go like, oh! Like,
Yeah, and then the music.
Like they're going around the corner. They're going around the corner, and then what they do is they're going around the corner, say, okay, so I build myself up
Yeah.
for the jump, but then that's not the jump.
Yeah.
I hate them.
Okay, and just as but you know when the jump is? This is when I got it figured out now. They got you going around the corner. You're ready now for when they turn that corner for the jump.
It's not
The
there.
jump doesn't happen.
When they
so
turn
when
back
you,
around.
exactly, when you go relief and turn around, that's when the jump is there.
You know what? I give that girl with the popcorn, nachos, and hot dog a lot of props.
She
because
chokes
she
any
went by
popcorn.
herself. No, she went in there by herself.
That's why she eating all that.
Wrong.
Okay? I hope she don't choke at the popcorn. In fact, I need to call her there and make sure she's all right.
I give her lots of props.
I don't know. You got to be a special person then to go watch a horror film by yourself.
I've done that before.
Well, your point, eh? Point
No, but
made.
listen. I remember watching a horror, like I love horror films, right? Favorite genre, right? But I remember one, I
Favorite.
can't remember which one it was. Like The Exorcist is my all-time favorite, right? But I remember watching one several years ago, and it got so creepy. There was like 6 of us in the theater, and we were all scattered out, right? But
You didn't know
after the
each other,
first,
they were just
we didn't know these people, right?
Random people.
After the first jump, I
You
saw
huddled?
men and women coming closer.
Yeah.
Everybody were in the same row.
That's
Do you know the
pathetic.
last? You know the last
it's not.
film that I
It's
watched.
not a real thing. It's not real.
And
You don't
says
need
the
to-
man who doesn't go to horror
I don't
films.
go to them, but it's not because I
You
don't
can't
know.
comment.
Yeah, listen, it's
You
not
you
the
remove yourself
scariness.
from the comments.
It's listen to what I'm saying. You have to understand something. It's not the horror part.
Yeah, it is.
No, I'm telling you, it's not. That's what freaks me out. It doesn't like ugly masks. And all. That's something. It's the jumping out at you.
It's
That's
all
I
of
don't-
it that
Who
freaks
needs to
me
be
out.
jumping out at you?
The last movie that I watched in the theater, horror
But-
film, was The Ring back in
Oh,
2002.
Oh my God, that
And I was
creeped me
dragged.
out.
I was dragged to watch that. I was in college.
creeped
and
me
my
out.
friend, my
So, let me explain.
I was dragged to
Candy.
it. And
They had a rope.
I just can't.
Come here, Candy.
They tied you up
Yep,
and they drag you.
pretty much.
Candy, listen to me. That
That-
movie was creepy,
Pretty
right?
much, yes.
I was
And
living in Atlanta. I had just gone there to school, and I was staying with my friend. I knew we got to go to break, right? And she had 2 bedrooms, right? And I came out of that bedroom to come in her bedroom to sleep. And when I needed to get up to use the bathroom, I'd wake her up to go and meet in the
Yeah,
bathroom.
see,
Like I
that's-
decided, like when I
that's-
left that movie, I
that's
decided,
not
I'm
good.
like,
No,
why would people
no.
want to do this?
So first
I
of
never
all,
went
2
back.
things. One, they drag you and then they tied you to the seat. Mm-hmm. Okay, just clearing that up
Because
for the
then
audience.
it was dark and I didn't want to go
Right.
outside and
the
wait for
second
them by
thing is,
myself.
Let me just tell you why I tell you I'm not scared about horror movies. See, you know what y'all just showed me? The horror lingers for y'all. Okay?
But it
does
no.
for some.
See,
Yes.
see, that's what I'm saying. I'm only like that. I'm only afraid of the scariness of the jumping.
So then you
I don't
should go.
leave the movie and go like,
Well, that's you, Ed.
That's you. Yeah, but the thing is, he hasn't even seen these things to know if they linger because he doesn't go to horror movies.
I know,
listen,
things
Rogan,
stay
Rogan,
with me.
Rogan,
Don't.
Rogan.
You can't
I know,
comment.
listen to
I
me,
don't
hold
like
on.
it.
I know I can't comment, but I'm going to comment.
No.
Listen, you're telling me that you go and see a movie where, say, for instance, things are coming out of the ground.
Yes.
And then
Oh,
for
I
that,
can.
and then on your way to the car, you're thinking,
No, it
is
doesn't
anything going to come out of the ground?
No, it's not. No, let's not.
I
let's
literally
not
listen.
oversimplify it.
I will put my feet up in the chair in the theater because I think somebody's gonna grab my feet.
See, that's where it's a little.
No, because
when
I
you go
don't
home.
like. I don't, and then I don't like that.
So
and then I
she
have to
is
check
going.
under my bed.
She is going
I
under.
have to
See, that's what I'm saying. She's going into other people's
Yes.
bedroom because why?
It-
You think
it lingers
the people
for
are
some
coming?
people.
The thing
My
for
point
the,
is, things go bump in the night, and you're like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, see, you have that thing. You've always told me about that. Yeah,
What?
you believe in ghosts, I know, and things like that. So I
I
understand.
believe in spirits and stuff
And
like
yeah,
that.
so that's what the promise. So what's the promise? You have that already. You go in a movie
told you
in a
I've-
horror
I've-
life.
I've been harassed.
Okay, you living a horror life.
Guess what? Do you ever feel like, I don't know, if when you're in the shower and say you're washing your face
Oh,
and
yeah.
your eyes are closed,
I'd be like, oh, no,
you
something
feel like
watching
somebody.
me. Yes.
And then you try to hurry up and rinse off the soap so you open your
Yes.
eyes to make sure nobody's
Candy,
there.
and you are right here. Yes,
Yes.
babe.
So this is the problem. Y'all are literally living
Yes,
a
Candy.
horror show
You're like,
life.
oh my god,
Okay,
oh my god,
we'll be
somebody's
back.
there.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sitting here with 2 people who literally their life is a horror show. Please, if you see either Candelaria Thompson or Rogan
Lights
Smith,
out. That's what it's called.
don't don't creep up on them. Just make sure because
Some people want me because they get punched.
they'll turn around and they probably got you walk around with 2x4. Huh?
I say you get punched. I say you get
Okay.
hit. You want that again.
You should carry a 2x4.
I know 2x4.
Okay.
I got a 2.
Well, anyway, so that's that. What else is going on?
You tell us.
What's happening? No, nothing much. I had a relatively quiet weekend. I saw and Lion King, as I said to you, and it was good. If anything about that is, nothing changed. Scar, he still got killed. Scar?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the movie, the ending did not change.
It didn't change.
Okay.
So I was expecting a twist. I was expecting a little twist.
I heard people still cried when
What?
when Mufasa
Really?
died.
Anyway, enough Lion King stuff. So what's happening I saw something in the newspaper this morning. I can't remember what it was about. It was about the BTC thing.
Yeah, with the CEO. I totally agree with Gary Sinclair. He was talking about the fact that the unions really need to get real about the environment, the current environment that they're operating in. They're putting a lot of pressure on BTC, have certain expectations, but they're operating now in an environment where there's competition versus when there was, a monopoly.
Now, you see, so
absolutely
everyone got
correct.
freaked out because Nair said certain things, right? And we got into that nationalistic thing, right? But let's be
Now let's
frank.
be real.
And certainly the Prime Minister stuff was completely off bounds. Bahamian, non-Bahamian, no one should be talking about the office of the Prime Minister that way. But
we dealt
let's
with
now,
that.
we finished with that.
Yeah.
So let's now talk about, just service levels. How about that?
Yeah.
As Bahamians, can one say that, because, he spoke to I'm not going to call the name, but he spoke about a particular branch. I've been in that branch.
And you can agree.
I was not thrilled with the level. Okay, so, because here's the deal now. In terms of you being able to supply to make sure that your business model is working, do you completely now ignore the actual because of who said it?
Right.
And then find out, things aren't working out, as opposed to now you just say, okay, now let's take a look inside and say, okay, what's real? Okay? Yeah. Because that's really what you have to, because if he was just making it up, that's another story.
Yeah. Nationalism aside, there's truth to what has been said. And, I think as with any country or any entity that has a monopoly, people can do and get away with what they want to get away with because there's no competition. So the order of the day has to change, and I mean, honestly, I remember having an experience with one of our telephone providers, and I was lured to, or people give inducements to you to come to the other side, and I remember contacting the phone company and saying, listen, someone wants my business, I've been a faithful customer for XYZ amount of years, always paid my bill on time. What can you guys do? And I was told, well, if you feel like you need to leave, then leave.
Well, there you go.
It's as simple as that. So what did I do? I left. Because if that's what you're giving me, a faithful customer after like 7 years, then you don't deserve my business, and you can't operate like that. I wouldn't want you. If you came to me, Candy, and said you're my customer for 7 years, you always paid on time, what can I do? I'm going to roll out the red carpet to keep you.
Right.
Okay?
Well, I had a situation, as I told you guys. I don't know if you're aware. You remember what I told you about where I not for the reasons of moving. I had too many phones. I had about 2 or 3 phones, and I said, you know what, this is ridiculous. So I said, I'm going to cut this phone off. So I went in, because it's not an easy thing. You got to go in, you got to sign papers and stuff, and I shut it down. Well, about a month or 2 later, I get a bill, but the bill has a $4,000 credit on it. A credit. So that sounds all well and good, except I don't want anyone coming to me and saying I owe them $4,000.
Yeah.
So I called the people. I went up to the top. At the time, Leon Williams was there. I said, look, I finished. I've closed this out. I don't have a credit. So can you just zero this out? And, and they said, but their response to me was, well, you have to wait till it goes down through the billing. So let's say my bill was $100 a month. It'd have to go down $100 a month. That's what they told me. So for years, I would get the bill. It would go
annoying
down
is that?
and down, and it would go down. I said, okay, they say, But I told him, I said, look, when the bill goes down, when it gets to zero, don't come to me and say, oh, you owe us $4,000. I said, because it's not going to happen.
Did you get anything in writing from them that said that it would have to go down?
No, and I kept on asking for stuff, and I never got anything. Mm-hmm. So the bill got to zero. Then it went to plus 100.
That's what I thought was going to
I
happen.
think now it's up to about 900.
No.
So anyway, so I went to one office. I'm not going to say where. It's not relevant. 3 times. And I said, look, I shut the thing down. Stop sending me this bill. Just stop sending me the bill. They finally, on the third visit, they go, well, we can't. You got to have to go to our office. I went there. Then they're like interrogating me. It's like I'm in an inquisition. I'm like, here, buddy, check your records. You can see that I have not used the phone. Okay, so and I wasn't thrilled with the whole presentation and stuff. So I'm just saying, listen, I'm not trying to pick on anyone, but maybe when someone is telling you something, you need to kind of be introspective. Mm-hmm. And say, okay, didn't like him, didn't like what he said, didn't like how he said it. Mm-hmm. Is there any truth to what he said in terms of the actual, service levels? Because that's what's going to really make or break you, not him.
Right. That's what we always seem to ignore, or mean to ignore.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't want any entity to be decimated from losses. Yeah. But.
Because that's a major
that all of us are impacted. Yeah. You know what I mean? There are people who have families, and I obviously I care about them, but people
which
do
says
have
why
to
don't they then
care about themselves
to get it to boost up the thing?
It would only make sense, right?
How am I caring and you're not?
And you're
caring?
not, yeah. Yeah.
So, I also saw something in the paper.
Excuse me.
And by the way, our guest this afternoon is going to be. We're going to have a very interesting guest, I think. With all the stuff with sharks and all this type of stuff, we're going to have Mr. Brendan Talwar on, who's a research director down, and I'm sure I'm getting the title incorrect, at the KP Luther Institute. Mm-hmm. And they're doing a lot of stuff, so we'll talk about what they're doing as well. But we'll also talk about the shark thing. And it just so happened I turned on the TV last night on National Geographic, sharks.
Yeah,
and they got like in South Africa, like they got a beach where once a year people just get killed. So anyway, and they can't figure it out except science has to figure it out, like do breeding grounds shift closer, all kinds of but then there were these people swimming with the biggest great white shark you'll ever see. Take a picture.
I watched Nat Geo, and this woman, she was out on the, what do you call it, the little surfboard?
Yeah. And, paddleboard or something.
The paddleboard. Pardon me. Yeah, the paddleboard, and some shark attacked her, and her leg looked like minced meat.
Oh,
I was like, Jesus, oh Lord, why they showed me this?
Yeah. So anyway, it's still very rare, but and it may be the flavor of the month, and and then people forget it, but something we'll talk about. But I also saw something in the paper. Dwayne Sam was talking about, and I didn't get it because I didn't read the whole story about pageant. There was some body shaming, some shaming. Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
Okay, it must have been some beauty pageant where they were being cruel on social media.
Oh, you don't want Miss Bahamas something?
Yeah. When they rolled out the contestants.
What did he say about it?
Well, he was saying that why would you do this? Why would you?
This is this mean culture, boy.
Well, it's global, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people are brave. See. Listen, we're all guilty. We're all guilty of saying, boy, she looks thick. We all guilty. But we didn't put it out there.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're in the privacy of home. You're watching the TV. You're talking to the TV. Okay? Fine. Okay? But why can't you be... You and I would never write that.
Hell no.
You see what I'm saying? So why can't you say, okay, go home, talk to the TV, talk to your friends who are watching it, but to put it down so that you hurt the person isn't being hurt when you're talking to the TV.
Yeah.
So what do you think triggers that? Where people who don't have the courage, and by the way, the people who are talking,
I want them to post their pictures.
They look like steak themselves.
I want them to post their videos.
Okay.
Let me run.
Well, they probably have like a fake.
Right.
What you call that thing?
Level of anonymity
catfishing
there.
or whatever. They have a fake picture.
Fake-
They
No,
got,
fake pictures. There's a
No,
lot of
some of them
filters
is-
and a lot of makeup.
yeah, they got like Farrah Fawcett.
Like
That's what they-
Snapchat filters.
But
But
I
I,
don't
think
know.
it's this because they know they can hide. Like you can get away with saying stuff and there's no, consequences, no anything.
Some people will say that.
So we don't care.
Do you think it's possible for Facebook and these other things, which all got the grams and all
The
that kind
answer
of
is
thing,
no.
what I can say?
To monitor or something like that, and,
To
so that when people say
to
these
just
things,
allow
they're
for
taken
civility.
down. But that's not life.
No, you can be critical, right? See, here's what I'm thinking. Remember I talked to you about the pursuit of happiness without infringing upon others? Okay, so you can be critical. I can say, Rogan, I don't think your opinion is correct, blah, blah, blah. But when you get into like where you could have a impact where someone can commit suicide because of what you said and did, I think that's kind of crossing the line.
Yeah, but I don't want Facebook to get to that point. I don't want to put the onus on them to do it. I think the onus should be on us to be a little bit more civil.
You can report things though. Through
Yeah, but I mean,
Facebook and stuff, can't you?
the bully isn't going to can't care about no onus.
I'm telling you where I'd prefer for it to be.
But they're not going to do it. They're not going to. Let me ask you, if you were in a school.
You could report things and they take things down all the time.
Yeah,
You
but
flag
sometimes the
things.
damage is
already
done.
done.
I mean, if you're in a high school and you have a bully, do you just like say to the bully, let the bully come to his own decision about being civil, or do you deal with that?
Or I could
Haven't
stand up to the bully.
Right. Well, but suppose the person can't stand up to the bully. Suppose the person is disabled or just weak in mind and just doesn't have that capacity.
Haven't there been cases? Well, I mean, in the U.S. reported and where somebody would have died by suicide, right? As a result of some messages or that were sent previously. And I can't remember the case, but the persons that were involved with sending the messages prior to the suicide, they were charged. They were charged for,
Murder?
I don't know, it wouldn't have been
Manslaughter or
murder,
something like that,
but
yeah.
it would have been some sort of assistance to,
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing like, well, we obviously don't have that down here, and I wonder if we have anything on the books about, anything, on social media or cyberbullying and stuff like that. But that's the only way people are going to. You
Except they're
get
anonymous.
control.
Well, I guess you could track it down.
Yeah.
But they go through, what do they call it, the dark net or something like that. I mean, there's some serious stuff out there, man. You know, I just think that it's had a major impact.
Negatively.
And I don't know. The positive. Lots of positive.
But
That's
it's
the
just
question.
the negative is so dark.
Why
man.
can't you see newspapers like which Rogan is looking at right now cannot print that stuff. They just can't. So why can't you have a similar type of I'm use the word. It's not regulated. It's self-regulated, but there's also libel issues. Mm-hmm. So you cannot just say anything about anyone because you could be sued. There's a source. What is happening on social media is people are anonymous. Some people don't have the resources to track people's IP through Croatia or whatever the heck is going on.
But everybody
doesn't have that
everybody ain't IP
right.
through Croatia.
Right.
Not everyone.
You know exactly who's
You
saying
know
these
who's saying
things.
and
Well,
then
sometimes you don't know, though. I mean, when you look at, Dilly Wild 5 and all that. Okay? Who the heck is Dilly Wild 5?
If you put Dilly Wild, you could still try.
No, you have to. Yeah, you can. I mean, the vast majority of people you probably can track. It's just those really savvy hacker type people who, and not the basic bully is not one who is, trying to, have all of this high tech stuff.
The average guy isn't tracking people who are saying negative comments. He doesn't have the wherewithal to do that. That's not just track.
But if you're going through something, if someone says that Ed Fields raped someone, you're going to use your resources
I'm going to use that
to find them.
right. But I'm not even
That's
concerned
different.
about those type of things because you'll just take action and that's
go as
legal
far as
issues,
you
right?
go, right?
But and I would hope that Facebook or whatever doesn't allow just pure outright slander like that. But I don't know.
They can't.
I mean,
they
they
can't.
can.
You
do.
post right now.
Well, they now filter hate speech.
Yeah.
So they can filter slander. They filter. You can't be a neo-Nazi. Hate groups. They're out.
If you go on your Facebook page right now and you just type Candy raped or whatever, that's going to show up.
I know it is. I'm just saying they should be able to filter that, just like they can filter hate speech. So they have the capacity to filter certain things. Someone shouldn't be able to accuse someone of a crime. That's just ridiculous. You can't do it in a newspaper. So why since we've shifted from a newspaper to a medium, that someone can just say that?
Because this is like the newspaper is like the middleman. I report it to the paper, and the paper prints it. The paper could determine it's not. But I don't have a middleman on social media. I just go straight to print.
Except that someone standing in the road can't say you did that, because they would be liable immediately. They'd be held accountable.
But you're saying, I'm explaining to you the difference in getting something to the newspaper,
which
has
to
go through a reporter or an editor, versus me just going on social media and hitting publish.
Right, but the reality is, the point I'm making is the newspaper could print it, but there's a repercussion.
Yeah.
I'm saying, why isn't there a repercussion
for the
person who's doing it on social media? That's all I'm saying. Because it's not good. It can ruin people's lives.
It has.
And it has ruined people's lives. I absolutely agree with you.
So something has to be done in that regard, and I think it'll be done.
I think, too, like, we don't need to be feeding it. So if Kendrick goes on social media and says Ed Fields did something crass, criminal, whatever, I'm on that page, Candy's on that page, Nambutu's on that page, we should be condemning Kendrick for that. Mm-hmm. Nobody should be joining in with that. I'd be disavowing that big time, because I don't even want any part of that.
Right.
You know?
One little quick question. Nambutu, what's his nickname? How you shorten that? Is it NIMP?
NB.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Brendan. Oh, Lord. Nambutu. Oh, yeah, we got Candy, and then we got Brendan. Talwa. We'll be right back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here, along with Rogan Smith and Candelaria Thompson. Our guest this afternoon is going to be Brendan Delwa from the Cape Eleuthera Institute, and that's going to be enlightening, to say the least, because there's a lot of stuff Talwar, sorry. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff going on. Period. In terms of research in the Bahamas that we have no clue about. And there's a lot of organizations doing it, and it's going to be interesting to see how, the research that's going on in the Bahamas impacts the rest of the world, because there's a lot. This is like it's just a living laboratory. There's a lot of species here that don't even exist elsewhere in the world. So we'll talk to Brendan about that in a sec. Kenny, what do you got for us?
So you remember when. Well, when I would have been working at Atlantis at this time, but I was like hitting 30, and I always used to come and talk about like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm doing, career-wise, or I don't think, was I married? Yes, I was married by then, but you had these concerns that you weren't, doing what you were supposed to be doing at that age, or you weren't where you were supposed to be, or accomplish the things that you wanted to accomplish at 30. Well, now... I'm rolling into 40.
So you run out of time?
No, but then now your concerns have, and the things that you were thinking about has changed. Like, it's not even career for me anymore, because I'm somewhat settling into something that I found, but it's more now like, oh goodness, like health. Mm-hmm. And taking care of yourself, and just make, and then I Interestingly enough, I saw this article, and it says, a wake-up call. Your health before age 40 is tied to risks later in life. More specifically like heart risks. Yeah. And that got me thinking. Rewind. Let me check to see, what kind of stuff I was doing prior, and I've always been somebody who exercised.
Yeah.
I've always exercised. I've always tried to, eat somewhat relatively well, but it's getting harder. It's getting harder to, like eat, just keep the, a balanced life. You know what I mean? And it just, and I, even with my kids, like I try to instill healthy eating habits, because I don't remember having, being taught, a balanced. Oh, I hope my parents aren't listening to this. But Bahamians, we don't really sit down and talk about nutrition like how we ought to.
That's so true.
And and that's partly the reason why so many adults now have so many issues like diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and all these things. And I mean, and this article is just, I mean, it literally like opened my eyes to a lot of, like, if you're able to instill these things from, into your children from a younger age, you would be doing them such a service for them, and you won't have approaching 40, 50 years old wondering and worrying about your health, because it was a practice from such an early age.
I was happy to hear you. I mean, surprised too to hear you say when we were chatting before on the break that you don't drink juice, and you say you rarely drink sodas.
Yeah, I drink coffee, tea, water, coconut water.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
And I have relatives who, like, I have a friend, let me say this, who does not allow her children to eat fast foods like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people will just buy, like, nuggets and french fries for their kids. Like, she's not on that run. Like, that's like a treat every blue moon for her. And I was trying to get a relative of mine to understand that same principle of not trying to expose your kid to these trans fats and all these processed meats and all these things, at an early age. Because, I mean, beyond the fact from the physical that it puts weight on you, it's just not healthy. And then we get our kids accustomed to these unhealthy diets, and that's what they start to crave rather than the healthy stuff.
Yeah. Sugar's the devil, by the way.
Well, if you look at some of these things, what you realize is that it isn't that easy.
Because
especially if you're not of means, it's cheaper than to buy a tomato.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult thing, and I mean, I'm aware of like label reading and all that.
Yeah.
You go into like, for instance, salt. My thing is salt.
Yeah.
Because I have high blood pressure. You cannot go into any restaurant and get something that is less than 3,000 milligrams of salt.
I disagree with you on that. Not in this country. And
No, I'm not talking about health restaurant. I'm talking about just regular restaurant. I'm not talking about if you target to go for that purpose. I'm talking about the regular run-of-the-mill restaurant. That's what it is. You go into a barbecue place. I remember going into a barbecue place once, and they actually had the salt content listed. I don't know why. This was in Philadelphia. They actually had the salt content listed on per menu item.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find anything less than 2,500 milligrams, and that's your daily intake.
I think a lot of it is our own, our own doing, because let's just take, I'm going to use one of our sponsors, Subway, right?
Uh-huh.
They sell healthy sandwiches. It's us who make them unhealthy, right? So you could get a veggie sandwich where you just have like the vegetables, or you could get the veggie patty or something like that, or you could get a turkey sandwich with no cheese and no condiments, or very light on the condiments. It's us who say, give me this, and then put the mayo, put the mustard, put the this, put the that. And we make the sandwiches unhealthy.
And it's also our relationship with food.
Yeah, because Trey said that 9 out of 10 people, that's what they're going to do. They're going to get, well, first of all, all the meats. All the meats are processed. So if you can get a veggie sandwich, well, great. You might as well just stay on that one. But the point is, I'm saying the way that the world is set up, the food supply in a grocery store, for instance, just in a grocery store, I challenge you to go into a grocery store and find low salt stuff in any kind of volume. It's almost impossible.
You could get tuna in the can. It's in water that has a
probably
small
has sodium. Probably has
even
sodium.
If
for preservative purposes. Because anything in a can, number one, the reason why they have certain things is to preserve it.
But I'm saying, if you see, there's going to have to be a trade-off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So either you have the money to go and get a slab of tuna that is not preserved, or you're going to have to make or you're going to have to say, okay, I can't afford that tuna chunk. I have to go and get it in the can. But getting tuna in the can is a better option than getting corned beef. Okay? Mm-hmm. And if we're talking about finances, this bottle of water right here or another bottle is cheaper than the same bottle of juice.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So there are options.
So 3 ounces of canned tuna has 300 milligrams of salt.
What's that? 1 can?
3 ounces of canned tuna. 3 ounces
of canned tuna. as
300 milligrams of salt.
Okay, that's not
a lot.
That's
Well, your
not
daily
bad
intake.
compared.
No, but I'm just saying your daily. I don't know how much 3 ounces is, but your daily intake is 2,000 milligrams.
Yeah, but 300 of 2,000.
Okay,
that's not bad.
Okay, then the bread that you put it on, if you have bread to make a sandwich, that got another 300. It adds up really quickly. The mayonnaise that you mix it with.
But you know,
I know you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's what happens. It adds up very quickly.
No, we know what the problem is and how people are. Sorry to take it right.
Ahead.
We know what the problem is and how people are preparing things. But what I'm saying is, to your point about the cost factor, I'm saying that there are things that people can be purchasing that aren't as bad as some other things, like the potted spam and the corned beef and all that
well,
stuff.
I mean, those
And we drink a lot of our calories. We
No,
drink
I
a
was
lot of
just gonna
sugar.
say, there's a lot of juice in people's fridge. I mean, period.
lot.
People
A lot
think
of
juice
people
is healthy.
don't, and it's
Get
not.
some nice orange juice. It's full of sugar.
It's not. It's
Listen.
not. Water. Go on.
Water is
I gotta wind it up because we have a guest. But,
Yeah, but I mean, all I was just saying is, it's by the time if you wait until you're middle age,
oh yeah,
it's very
I over.
difficult to reverse the. No,
I
it's
over.
true.
It's over for Ed.
I finished a long time. I remember
It's
that.
it's difficult to reverse, the damage that may have already happened
When
from
people
a
ask me
child.
how I'm doing, you know what I say? Paying the bills and waiting to die. That's what
That's
it is.
accurate.
And guess what?
It's accurate.
You could be right here 100 saying
accurate.
the same thing.
No, she's.
It's right there.
Yeah. All right, listen, Candy. Thank you very much. We're going to bring our guest in now, but thank you very much, and
Thanks,
thank you
Candy.
for
That was
Thank
good.
you.
thank you for the salt-free curry.
Yes, a lie.
Good evening. Hold on, let me pull this up to you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith, and our special guest this afternoon is Brendan Talwa, who is a research scientist with the Cape Eleuthera Institute, which I would make a bet, Miss Smith, most Bahamians don't even know exists. You think?
I didn't know it existed.
Did you know? In the big, deep creek. And let me tell you, man, every time, one of these folks come from, I was telling Brendan today, from Deep Creek or, the South Eleuthera, and I say, the difference between Deep Creek and Nassau is extreme, to say the least, okay? You ever been to Deep Creek? You not been to D.C.?
DC. I've been to DC, Washington. not that Deep Creek.
So anyway, listen, Brendan, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having
you. So first of all, tell us what the Cape Eleuthera Institute is, because to some people it might sound like that's a place where they send crazy people. But what it sounds like a horror movie.
It does,
Yeah. But no, tell us what's going on in the Cape Eleuthera Institute.
Most people are probably more familiar with the Island School. It's been around a bit longer, since the late 90s. So that's a high school study abroad semester program for kids from all over the world. Always a few Bahamian students that are there each semester. And so the Cape Eleuthera Institute grew out of that program. Basically, they had a research class, and out of that came a need for more research to take place, and so it evolved its own kind of story from there. Okay. So it's been around about 10 years, and we do research all over the place.
So tell us what your kind of core research is focused on.
I'd say, well, it changes. I guess depending on who's there, the themes change over time. So right now the big themes are coral restoration, deep sea exploration, and kind of basic characterization of what actually lives in the deep ocean in the Bahamas, and then fisheries-related science. So that's on everything from the lobster fishery, which is certified sustainable in the Bahamas, stone crabs.
Certified sustainable. We the dunces over here, except for Rogan. Certified sustainable. What does that mean? What does that mean?
It means basically you can get a leg up on your competition if you get a certification that says your product is sustainable, right? So people want that product more. And lobster coming out of the Bahamas is certified sustainable by the Marine Stewardship Council. So it gets a special label on it, and it's good for Bahamian exports, essentially.
So, say, is Maine lobster certified sustainable?
Ooh, that I don't know.
Okay, all right. Because it means that's something you can continue to fish without endangering it. Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
What is, just, talking about fisheries, what is our fisheries like in terms of the level of I don't even know the terms to use, but how far have we gone? Like, for instance, if you get up in the East Coast, there's some fish like cod and things that are just almost wiped out, right?
Right.
How are we in our fisheries here?
It depends on what you compare them to.
Okay.
And it all depends on the species that you're talking about. Some species like queen conch are doing really poorly, and they're in critical need of improved management, and the BNT's doing a lot to make that happen. Other species like sharks are doing really well. So if you compare shark populations here in the Bahamas to those that might occur elsewhere in the Caribbean, it's a different world.
All right, so we're going to get to Jaws in a second, because we always have to we have to put the dun later on. But so you got a lot of touring scientists coming through that institute.
Absolutely.
And these are top people from around the world, correct?
Yeah, they're experts from all over the place. We get a lot of researchers from the U.S., but really we host scientists from all over the world. We recently there's something called the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So if you hear that a species is listed as endangered, usually that's in reference to this organization that actually lists species that determines what level of threat they experience. So, for instance, we just had a workshop that assessed the level of threat for sharks in the Caribbean. So that brings fisheries scientists and managers from Mexico and Honduras and all over the place.
All right. Now, I saw something actually on TV yesterday. Was it on 60 Minutes? I can't remember. Maybe it was. It was. It was on the process of listing species that are endangered, and they're saying how literally hundreds and thousands of species are either extinct or about to become extinct. I mean, it's growing exponentially, right? And that now the Trump organization, it's like an organization. The Trump administration is getting ready to now. They're not really big on it because there's a commercial aspect to listing things as endangered because it can have impact on people's land usage, etc. And they're now thinking of associating or publishing the cost of putting it on a list, which they hope would then discourage people from wanting to put it on the list. Are you hearing stuff about that?
Yeah, I've heard about this for a long time. It's obviously, if a species is truly under that level of threat and is endangered, then it should be on the endangered species list in the U.S. I think what frustrates people that work in the federal government in the United States is that oftentimes there are petitions put in to list a species that doesn't actually deserve to be listed. And then they have to go through the whole process, the legal process of assessing whether or not that's the case, even though a lot of data might suggest that it's not. And so then a lot of taxpayer money is getting spent on seeing if a species needs to be listed when others really need that attention. And so it can, if too many petitions are put in, then you're wasting money on some species and not helping the ones that need it at the right time.
They were even saying how species, Rogan, get to be endangered because the level of cuteness, for instance, it's a cute thing versus some, prehistoric looking bug that may be the thing that causes the sustaining of another thing in the food chain, but no one really thinks of it as cute or warm and fuzzy. So no one, Right. All right, so we get to the thing that I think interests Bahamians a lot nowadays. I just went out on a boating trip this weekend, in fact, and I'll tell you, we went to Rose Island. The anxiety started from the day before for me. Okay, especially since my daughter feels that she wants to just swim around, over reefs, and this is my interpretation now, shark feeding grounds. Okay, that's how I feel about it because it would just transpired. Okay, so there's a lot of anxiety out there, but there's also a lot of myth and a lot of misinformation. I happened to be on the boat, the Alusha, the day after the shark attack. And I was fortunate just by accident to be around some of the world's the most just acclaimed shark experts. First of all, you're a shark. You research sharks, correct?
I do.
So you would be considered a shark expert. I'm titling you that now, okay? Because none of us in here are shark experts. Did you have any sort of conclusion with regard to that particular attack, or is it just you just don't know?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Since you were on that boat, I've also been on that boat, and so I've only heard rumors. Last I heard there were a few sharks involved. I've heard rumors that there was feeding happening.
Right. There's all sorts of things. You just don't know.
Yeah, so I really couldn't say.
Yeah.
Is it normal for sharks to come close to the shore? Because I know that's a big concern for a lot of people. There used to be, in the past, people would think, oh, sharks don't really come so close. But I mean, is that typical behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. Sharks are
very casual.
Sharks are in the ocean. If there's salt water there are sharks there. They absolutely come in close to shore. They follow their food, and their food comes in close to shore. Some species actually give birth in places that are a mix between salt and freshwater. Some species can even go up into freshwater rivers. So yeah, there are sharks all over the place. But really, they're not interested in interacting with people.
I was going to ask that as well. Are there sharks that typically, they're in search for food, yes, but they're not, like you say, interested in interacting with human beings? Because a lot of times you'll hear that there are certain shark species that are just naturally more aggressive than others. I can't remember which one was quoted recently, but they don't care what it is. They'll just go up and investigate and have interaction with humans at times.
I hear that a lot, but folks that spend a lot of time in the water with these animals know how cautious they are. So, for instance, on this trip, we were trying to find oceanic white-tip sharks, which are critically endangered in this part of the world. And thankfully, one of the only groups of them you can find anywhere is actually in southern Cat Island. And so you can sit there. One of the guys we work with is often in the water scraping fish. So he's trying to bring the sharks in so that we can catch them for research purposes and then release them safely. They never come in quickly and take the fish out of his hand. He's sitting there in the water for 8 hours.
Really?
And maybe after 6 hours, nothing comes, and then one shark comes in the distance and slowly comes in and eats little pieces and gets comfortable. But they're generally very, very cautious.
How big are these sharks?
Oceanic whitetips down by Cat are adults, so they're typically between 2.5 to a little over 3 meters.
Wow, that's
so like 9 footers.
Okay, that's big.
Yeah.
Okay.
Six
don't say
6
meters.
to 9
I don't
footers.
like that. Okay. I don't like when you say meters. Okay. We're a foot country. Okay.
9 feet.
Yeah. 9 feet at about the biggest down there.
Oh my God.
But people dive with them all the time, snorkel with them all the time, and they bring in a ton of money to a place that is economically depressed.
Yeah.
People come from all over the world to Cat Island.
Yeah. Just the crazy people. But let me just say this: I saw last night on it was outside of not Mexico. God, where was it? Because they didn't think they're normally there, but they were. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember. Guadalupe. I don't know. I'm gonna. Or maybe it was even South Africa. The Big Blue, which was this big big great white shark.
Mm-hmm.
Floating around, they had a carcass out there, a whale carcass that they had taken out because it had beached. So sharks were feeding on this. Mm-hmm. These people were in the water with snorkels, just filming these things. And the great white, in fact, you know how they know how big the great white was? They could do it proportionally to them. Okay? They were able to say, well, you see how big, you see how small Betsy is compared to the shark. That's how we measure the shark. I mean, this thing was huge. It was 20 feet.
Oh my God.
And big.
Oh my
In fact,
God.
it was so big, I don't think it could really, it just ate a lot. I don't think it could attack anyone. It was too slow. But it was just, I mean, have you ever been in the water with a great white?
I have not, no.
Would you?
I would if I was with the right people.
Yeah, the right people.
Right.
Like the people that don't taste good.
Right. Yeah.
So let me ask you, and all jokes aside, how did we get to the word man-eating shark? Because that's where, you talk about the myth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That myth, I mean, we don't often say that now at all, I think, okay? But that's like a genuine term. Mm-hmm. There are man-eating sharks out there. Well, I'm a man. I don't want to be the eaten. Mm-hmm. So how do we dispel that stuff?
I think education is key. Having people understand it's a difference between perceived risk and actual risk. Everyone loves to have something to fear. It's exciting. You hop in the water, you don't know what's there, you can't see the bottom. It gets the adrenaline going, and so a combination of a fear of the unknown and people making money off of the myth through things like Shark Week, through things like Jaws, and tons of other movies that have come out since, keep perpetuating this idea that sharks are out there to eat people. In reality, that's not the case at all. Sharks are out there to eat mostly fish. And most sharks are actually really small and live in the deep ocean, and people never even see them. There are over 500 species, and in the news you find, typically 3 to 5 species that are responsible for most negative interactions with people.
When you think about it, there are people at more danger of another person killing them than a shark.
Absolutely, yeah. You're in more danger driving to work in the morning.
Yeah.
From a conservation standpoint, are you ever concerned that people might take things into their own hands? And I say that I remember several years ago on Montague Beach, people were attacking a shark, throwing rocks at it, throwing spears, and trying to kill it. It was just swimming there, right? But then when you have something happen like what transpired on Rose Island, people might feel justified in killing these sharks as they come, close to the shore. And I would imagine that would set you guys back, what you're trying to do with the education, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's tough because I understand that people are upset, and when a tragedy like this happens, it's hard to not want to do something about it. I think we can learn from the places that have done something about it, that haven't seen a change in the actual risk of shark attacks. Places that have put in culling programs, for instance, or places that don't have sharks and as a result don't have the healthy ecosystems that we have here. So it's important to understand the benefits that they bring to the Bahamas, over $110 million every year in shark dive-related tourism, and also the ecological benefits. So they're far more valuable alive than they are dead.
Is it insensitive to say that you could equate that incident with, say, if you were on a tour bus, and the tour bus turned over and people were killed or hurt, that the reaction would be, well, we have to ban tour buses. I mean, is it akin to saying that?
Yeah, I think it's going after a problem that it's not that it doesn't exist, but it's trying to solve a problem in the wrong way. Okay. So as opposed to saying we should get rid of sharks in the Bahamas or we should kill sharks when we see them, I think a far better approach would be to say, if you see a shark, get out of the water if you're not interested in interacting with it, right? and
you are, right?
And if you're not, and you haven't done that before, then get out of the water. Yeah. If it's dawn or dusk and sharks are feeding in the area, get out of the water. Yeah. It's having an understanding that if you're in the water with a shark, you're putting yourself in some form of risk, and you have to accept that.
I mean, I was in South Africa a couple of years back. The resort that I lived at was surrounded by electrical wire. There was no jogging trails, okay, because everything outside that wire was wild, okay, was, lions and hippos and rhinos, okay. Well, it wouldn't be me, but if someone who lost their mind decided, I'm going to go for a little evening stroll, okay, okay,
outside,
and then, they were maimed by a lion, well, I don't know what you say, what kind of jackass was that? But this isn't the case. We are in their territory. Yeah. That's where they are. I mean, obviously things can be done. Now let's talk about, from your perspective, obviously, if you're going out on tour boats with people and especially where something has happened, certainly you would have someone who should be spotting and looking around to make sure, just like a lifeguard. Right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be throwing fish and food into the water. I think that people don't realize that they're chumming. They think, I'm just cleaning a fish. Yeah. I'm going to I caught a fish. It's all nice in the Bahamas, fresh fish. I'm going to clean the fish, and then we're going to cook the fish. It's all delicious, and then we're going to throw the remains in the water. Well, that's chumming, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just those type of behaviors. Now, we got a place out here, I don't know if you ever seen it, it's called Montague.
Haven't.
It's a fish
That's where
market, okay? And basically, it's adjacent to a swimming beach.
Yes.
Okay?
And they clean the
And
fish there.
Yes.
It's fish world.
All day.
Okay,
Right.
all day, every day. Conch shells in the water. It's slop. It's like a chum world. So that's obviously not a wise thing for them to be doing that. They should be figuring out how to dispose of this stuff in a different way, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me a lot of our dock, actually. We have fishermen that come in South Luther and clean conch every day at about 4 to 5 o'clock. And the sharks have started to come in to feed on the conch slop, and the fish remains. And
So they know what time to come.
Yeah, they know what time to come. It's the same, everybody who goes through marinas all over the Bahamas knows the sharks come in at feeding time. They get conditioned, same as a shark dive. And so what we've told our students is, don't swim off the dock between 4 to 6 p.m.
Because that's when
the sharks are there. And it's not just that the sharks are there, it's that they're there to feed.
eat.
Right. So if you're getting in the water, then you better be, understanding
if
of the fact that you're in the
they
kitchen.
might think that's like a little piece of conch.
Right, and that's not to say that it's too dangerous to get in, even in those situations, if you know what you're doing.
Right. But why get in?
But yeah, if you're not a feeder for a shark dive company, or a wildlife photographer that does this all the time, then you shouldn't be in the water.
So that's all over. Let me ask you. We're going to take a break. Because I want to ask you, what are the protocols in other countries in terms of fish cleaning, etc.? Have we just been so lucky for so many years that we just take it for granted that this is a way of life? And how do we change that around? We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith. We're here with Brendan Talwar, who's a research associate at Cape Eleuthera Institute in Deep Creek, Eleuthera. A lot of good stuff going on there, by the way. Island School and the Deep Creek Middle School. A lot of outreach with the Deep Creek Middle School. A lot of kids get to go off to school. Tell me, Brandon. We're an island nation, where even New Providence, but certainly the rest of the islands, they live off of fishing. Okay, I mean, not only it's not really even commercial fishing. That's how they survive. Okay, they come in, like you say. Talking around, everyone's hanging around the dock, scaling the fish, talking, hey, throw the guts in the water. This is what you do. What has changed over the years because I don't recall one person dying from a shark attack. I've heard of people getting bitten and all that sort of thing. What do we have to change our behavior, or we're just more because the media, etc. Is anything changed really?
I think the biggest thing that's changed is that there's better access to medical care, not only here but all over the world, and so fatalities have actually gone down over time because when someone is bitten, they can get the care they need quickly. So that's a good thing. At the same time, there are more people in the water than ever. And so with that, you'd expect people and sharks to interact with each other more often.
Now, I've also heard, because we have taken action to protect turtles and sharks, that there are more sharks in the water. Because, like, for instance, if you look at the east coast of the United States, they protected seals and sea lions and all these sorts of amphibious animals. And as a result, that's what great whites and sharks feed off, and so the sharks are coming closer to shore. It's hardly a week or a month goes by without hearing about some attack on the East Coast. Because man is so involved in processing these things, protecting sharks and protecting turtles and wiping out sharks and wiping out turtles, and are we just created an imbalance?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, around the world, the trend is for a general decrease in biodiversity and a decrease in shark and fish populations in general. But sharks have been hit really hard by fisheries ever since industrial fishing really began. And so we're killing about 100 million plus every year around the world.
I mean, that's even hard to. I mean,
it almost means nothing because the number's so big. Like, it's hard to imagine.
I mean, how many billion of sharks must you have to have before you can not wipe them out altogether?
Well, we're getting close to it for some species in some places. I mean, more and more are being listed as endangered every time assessments take place. Again, this is on a global scale. There are places that are doing a great job managing shark populations and where you've seen them actually recover. Mm-hmm. And so it is possible, and it's definitely a good thing. It just means that our perspective is different because the current generations are used to having very few sharks. So folks that live in Cape Cod aren't used to seeing great whites because they haven't for the past, 100 years.
Right.
Right. But historically, if you go far enough back, there were seals there and there were sharks there. Mm-hmm. So you recover the seals, which everyone loves, and then of course there's food. The gray whites come. So it's kind of unintended consequences, but it is restoring it back to the way that it was.
It's like I tell people, they talk about when the road, like along Orange Hill gets wiped out. And they go, oh, the road was damaged by the hurricane. It's such a scenic road. They don't realize there was no road there. Mm-hmm. So the reality is when you talk about resorts on beaches, et cetera, the reality is there weren't resorts. Mm-hmm. So people weren't going in the water. Okay, so that's now this interaction you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Now, have we created a situation? Well, in the Bahamas. The Bahamas is a shark sanctuary.
Yep.
You told me when I spoke to you last that the Caribbean reef shark, which says Caribbean, it's very difficult to find in other parts of the Caribbean, but it's very plentiful here.
Yeah.
Has that always been the case here? Have we ever had lower populations of sharks? Have we had increased populations? Where are we in terms historically of our shark population?
It's hard to say because we don't have data going back all that long. We do have one data set going back to the 70s and 80s, and it appears, at least off of southern Eleuthera, that shark populations, just for reef sharks and tiger sharks anyways, are pretty much the same as they were in the 70s and 80s. So when people say that, there are more turtles and now the shark populations are increasing, at least from the research we've done, that's not the case. Mm-hmm. What it does show is that shark populations are generally stable in the Bahamas, which is a huge contrast to everywhere else in the Caribbean outside of basically U.S. waters, where populations have been fished heavily.
Why? Because they're fishing for sharks.
They're fishing for sharks.
For food.
For food. Yeah, okay. For food, for fins.
Yeah. That's the other thing. I mean, and it makes you it's kind of sickening even for people, I think, who are not conservationists, when you hear that they catch these animals, cut off the fin, and just throw them back in the water.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge animal welfare issue. The idea that you'd cut off the fins while the animal's alive and then let it sink to the ocean floor. If it weren't a fish, that wouldn't be legal. But at the same time, it's a huge waste.
Yeah.
So, you throw back that amount of meat that people could be eating.
Yeah.
It's just unnecessary at the end of the day.
So where's the world now in terms of, when you talk about 100 million sharks a year, and most of them, from what I understand, are just for the fin. Quite a bit. I mean, you catch them in nets and all that, accidentally and all that sort of thing, but there's a lot. I mean, what is the percentage of people going after just the fin?
I'm not sure. A lot of it is illegal and unreported, thanks to international management efforts. But at the same time, I would say bycatch, the issue of accidental catch, is bigger than the fin trade at this point. Yeah.
So how do we turn this stuff around? I mean, first of all, I think you have to explain to people, and it's very important. Why is it important? I mean, we don't want to kill sharks because it's inhumane, just to kill them. But what other reason is there? Because, I mean, there's obviously an ecological reason for not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I find is most compelling, if you're trying to make the case for shark conservation or management, is at the end of the day, people want to swim with sharks. And that sounds crazy to a lot of folks, but there are so many people that come to the Bahamas strictly to interact with these animals, to take photos of them, to swim with them, that it puts money
More
into
than 10?
More than
yeah.
10.
Okay.
Yeah, tons of people constantly going to Bimini, going to Grand Bahama, going to Cat Island. Even South Eleuthera has a shark dive. Nassau for sure. Stuart Cove,
I know,
absolutely.
but that's the most I thought it was more of an ecological, like if you wipe out every single shark, then it's going to just destroy the ecosystem.
I think for me as a biologist, yeah, the ecological reason is the most compelling.
Right.
But I think to the general public, to folks who might not care as much about ecology, then, the idea that they're bringing in money day after day to places that otherwise aren't having tourists come by.
Right.
That's a great reason to keep them around.
Okay.
For me as a scientist, yeah, it's important to know that the role that they play, at least the really big ones, the true apex predators, is important. They're keeping a lot of the ecosystem in check, and they're exerting forces on everything below them that maintains the ecosystem the way that we're used to it being. So if we want fisheries to continue as they are, if we want to continue having coral reef ecosystems the way that they are, again, bring in tourists, then, sharks play a role in that.
Okay. Now, if tomorrow you had your one kind of wish in terms of what you would like to see in terms of shark conservation, what would that be? What would be the ideal? And before I ask that question, let me get back to this. From your recollection or from your data, and this is very important, I think, for the Bahamian people to know, what is the record with regard to shark attacks in the Bahamas? I don't care about Germany right now. They could record their own thing. For the Bahamas, what is that kind of database?
The database that is actually it services the whole world is called the International Shark Attack File, and that's at the University of Florida.
That's guy Gavin
based.
that I met?
Gavin Naylor, yeah. So he's the director of shark research there, and he runs that database. And it's a great website, so if folks are interested, I definitely recommend going there. And you can see statistics broken down by country, by year. And so...
What's it called? Not the...
International database?
International Shark Attack File.
International Shark Attack File.
You can see how many are in the Bahamas each year. You can see how many are provoked, meaning... people chumming, trying to get sharks in and then getting bitten, versus how many are unprovoked, like a snorkeler, for instance. So there's a lot of good information in there.
Right. And also what we don't have is the baseline, which how many people are in the water.
Right, which is increasing.
I mean, because if you have 4 or 5 attacks and you have 10 million.
Right.
People in the water. Well, there you go. I imagine getting stung by jellyfish is more common than. For sure. Yeah.
I think the risk is 1 in almost 4 million of getting attacked by a shark. Yeah.
So if the research that you're doing, what is it that you wish to see in terms of how that manifests in, say, legislation and policy, et cetera, et cetera?
In the Bahamas?
Yeah, in the Bahamas specifically, because you're doing a lot of research here. But
yeah, the Bahamas has had a lot of foresight in first banning longlining in 1993, which really prevented the commercial harvest of sharks.
You remember that, Rogan?
No,
it was a big thing, longline fishing. It was one of the first protests led by Re-Earth. And people were, and it was right after the F&M took over in 92. And it was a big thing to get long-line fishermen in here. I remember that. I think before that, Bahamians didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah.
But obviously, and the whole purpose was not to kill sharks.
Right. Yeah. It's the scale of commercial longlining is eye-opening. It's the idea that there would be fleets in Bahamian waters setting long lines that are 100 miles long.
Hold on. A line is 100 miles long?
Yes. Lines that are...
100 miles? They have that much rope?
They have that much, monofilament on a spool. So
how long is the Bahamas? Are we 100 miles? 100 miles long? You're kidding me.
It's the length
of
Eleuthera.
Meters?
There are open ocean long lines that stretch that many miles.
Well, how long does it take to wind that up?
It takes a while. They'll let them sit for over a day at a time with hundreds of hooks.
Oh my God.
So
hundreds 100 miles.
Millions of hooks.
I mean, 100 miles long, Brendan?
That's on
extreme.
The bigger scale.
Yeah.
So if
10 miles is
more
long
common
enough.
would be 25 miles is about the average.
The whole length of Nassau.
Right. So imagine one line stretching that long, covered in baited hooks. You'd get the sharks fished out pretty quick. And so the foresight to prevent that was really key, because now we know how valuable the sharks are alive, and they simply wouldn't be here if longlining were permitted over the past 25 years.
So those islands that are benefiting from shark dives, et cetera, they wouldn't have that.
They wouldn't have that.
The longline fishing is a short-term gain for long-term damage.
Yeah, and again, I go back to Cat Island, Southern Cat Island. There's not a whole lot going on, and shark diving brings in a ton of business for a lot of folks. Mm-hmm. And from the work we've done, if we had to estimate a population size for oceanic whitetips down there, it would be in the ballpark of a few hundred individuals. So you could fish those out in a couple months. Yeah. And then there goes the value, right? Whereas currently it's every year.
Is there even any new risk of that it being reintroduced? I don't think so, huh?
According to Eric Carey, the director of the Bahamas National Trust, there is risk of that. He just spoke at the island school recently and mentioned that he has heard rumors of it being allowed.
People making application for doing that?
I don't know about applications. Yeah. I don't know any specifics.
Yeah.
But I know that it sounded to me like he'd heard of folks that were interested in making that happen. And that's terrifying to me, because there would be short-term gain over the course of 6 months, and then it would be done.
That long, that short a period of time.
Yeah.
So going back, you said you'd like to see, you saw how we took that out of play. Mm-hmm. What else do we need to do?
I think at this point, longlining is banned, and technically the Bahamas is a shark sanctuary. I think the next step is to actually enforce that legislation. So that can be preventing foreign boats from coming into Bahamian waters and fishing, potentially with long lines. And that can be actually having consequences when folks do kill sharks.
Given our stretch of islands and look, I think we got about 5 Defense Force boats. The fact that you can say 5, is kind of scary. How viable is it for us to be, are there resources that we can bring in? Are we concerned about sovereignty issues? How viable is it for us to protect that?
It would be difficult. That's a bit outside of my area of study, but I think there are new technologies that could be used to patrol large distances, things like long-range drones especially. Mm-hmm. That would make it possible for Defense Force boats to cover huge areas without actually moving unless they want to get a boat.
Right.
And that could help with things like drug smuggling. That could help with
people smuggling.
And that could help with illegal fishing by foreign vessels as well. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think that would be a great first step, to really prevent large-scale harvest, not only of sharks but also conch and lobster by foreign fleets, is to me a much bigger issue than preventing the illegal take of sharks on a really small scale.
Yeah. So your outlook, what is it? You've been doing this now for how many years in the Bahamas?
About 8 years.
Okay, so have you seen progress, or is it just kind of like a flat line? What's your prognosis on things?
In terms of? Just
the whole conservation. I get the feeling, I could be wrong, that when I was growing up, I don't think that we even knew what the word conservation was. Mm-hmm. I think it had to do, you got it confused with conservative. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Right.
Whereas now I know that there are just a ton of Bahamians who are involved in the field of marine science and marine conservation and marine biology. The younger kids seem to be in tune with the whole issue of conservation. You've got the island school and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. What are you saying in terms of the time that you've been here, in terms of the attitude? I see a lot of change in opinions, but just the average fisherman that you couldn't talk to a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think I'm generally optimistic, and part of that optimism comes from this recent expedition to Haiti, where we saw what it looks like when a place has been fished out. We were using all the same techniques we use here to find sharks, and we were we were struggling. It was difficult to find a single shark down there. As soon as we came back into the southern Bahamas, we found sharks. And so I'm optimistic because I think in general the Bahamas is doing a lot better than other Caribbean nations. And there are a lot of great people that are working to do an even better job in the future. And so, yeah, I'd say optimistic overall.
Given the size of and then we got to go in a second, but given the size of the Bahamian population, which is relatively small, and the commercial fisheries demand on the resources, can the Bahamas Can the Bahamas serve as a nursery that essentially replenish? I mean, because let's face it, a fish doesn't just say, "Oh, I'm in the Bahamas. I'm not going out of here because I'm going to get fish." Can the Bahamas be a nursery that essentially replenishes a greater Caribbean Sea?
Yeah, for some species, for sure. For animals like sharks that travel long distances, we definitely see some of that. You know, they do leave the Bahamas. They go to places where they're vulnerable to fishing. And if they survive those places, then they come back. And so, yeah, it's a really great point, because if we want to conserve these animals that travel thousands of miles, we need to not only protect them here, but work with countries elsewhere to make sure they're protected throughout their life cycle. Yeah,
because otherwise they go fishing and get fished out. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I'm hoping maybe the Bahamas will be kind of like the living lab for many, many years to come, so that you can continue to study these things. And for the Bahamian people, we can continue to benefit off the resource.
Definitely.
Which I don't think the average Bahamian even realizes that we have, you know. So.
Yeah, it's a special place.
All right, well, listen, Brendan, thank you very much. Watch out for those shark dives.
Thank you.
It still freaks me out. Anyway, thanks for coming by, and I'm sure we'll talk more with you in the future. One last thing, I got to ask this. What is the Institute doing in terms of outreach to government, in terms of making the government or making itself available to government for the resources and the research information that you have?
We send all of the research that we do straight to the BNT. And we work with the BNT closely all the time.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Listen, thank you for coming by. Ken, Rogan,
Thanks, Ken.
and Brendan, thanks once again for coming by, and
thank you.
Be safe. Take care.